My wife admitted to cheating on me during the company dinner with her boss. So I said, get your things and leave the house. Our children will know who you are. You have destroyed everything we had built together. The sentence was out of my mouth before I could think. My voice was shaking, not from weakness, but from pure fury. The air around us was heavy, burdened by the weight of a truth I never wanted to know. I looked at that woman, the same one I had sworn to love forever, and I saw a completely different person. The face that was once my refuge was now the face of my greatest disappointment. Her eyes were full of tears, but there was no remorse, only fear. Fear of what I might do, fear of what would happen next. The silence between us was an unbridgeable chasm. Every second brought with it the pain of years of loyalty nullified in a single night. He tried to stammer some explanation, but all he heard was an annoying buzz like the sound of an insistent mosquito. I didn't need to hear anything else. The fact was there, completely evident, and it hurt more than whatever I could imagine. The images formed in my mind without me having control over them. They laughed together, him touching her like I did him, kissing her. Ava took what was mine for herself. My stomach turned just thinking about it. My chest burned like it was on fire. It was like my house, my life, my marriage. Everything had been reduced to ashes in a few seconds. But the betrayal was not just physical, it was something much bigger, much deeper. It was a betrayal of trust, respect, for collaboration. For years, I dedicated myself to this marriage. I worked hard to give her and our children a dignified life. I followed her by her side in all the difficulties. I supported her dreams. I sacrificed mine. And for what? To be deceived, humiliated, betrayed in the most ignoble way possible. I knew that love could end, that marriages cooled. The betrayal that was not justifiable. It was a direct blow to the heart of any man. She started to cry. Maybe she wanted comfort, to sit like I have done so many other times in difficult times. But this time I couldn't. I didn't want my pain. It was too big to leave room for anything else. She opened her mouth and started to explain, but I raised my hand to tell her to shut up. I didn't want an apology. I didn't want to hear lies to ease her guilt. I wanted her to disappear from my life. You know what you did? My voice came out cold, controlled, but full of venom. You know what you destroyed. You know how much every brick of this house cost, every conquest of ours. You threw away years of complicity for one night with your boss. That's how it is. Tell me it was beautiful. It was worth it. Sob. I don't know what to say. I laughed, a bitter laugh, humorless and soulless. So don't say anything. Just go away. Take your things and go now. She hesitated. She kept looking at me as if looking for an opening, a chance, a last ray of hope. But for her there was nothing there, nothing but contempt. I saw the exact moment she realized. I saw the exact moment she realized there was no turning back. Our children will know. My voice came out cold, deadly. Her eyes widened. No, please. Yes. I crossed my arms. They will know exactly who you are. They will know that their mother threw her family away for a fling. Pathetic. She fell to her knees, crying uncontrollably. But I didn't mind. All I felt was a huge hole in my chest. I loved her. I loved with all my might. But now, she was just another stranger. The pain came in waves, suffocating, cruel. I knew that night was just the beginning of the hell I would face. But one thing was for sure, I wouldn't let her get away without consequences. She would feel the weight of her choices. And when everything was falling apart around her, when she would realize the mistake she had made when he discarded her like an old broken toy, then, and only then, would I be there to watch. But if I told you that in the end it was she who paid the highest price, and if I told you that fate had reserved for her the greatest punishment I could ever imagine, you might think you know how this story ends. But I promise you have no idea. Welcome to the channel, where betrayal will never be romanticized or justified. Here we believe that loyalty and respect are pillars not negotiable in every relationship. All stories are fictional, but they reflect a harsh and immutable truth. Betrayal destroys homes, breaks trust, and leaves scars that never fade. Get ready to dive into an intense narrative full of twists and real consequences. You are about to hear a shocking story where every choice has a price and the truth always comes out. Fasten your seatbelts. The story begins now. Daniel has always believed that his life had followed a solid and predictable path. From the moment he met Laura, he knew that she was the woman with whom he wanted to share his years, his dreams, and his conquests. They met in college when he was studying economics and advertising. He was a practical, methodical man, always looking for stability, while she was the opposite, full of ideas, spontaneous, passionate about new things. Somehow they found balance in each other like the pieces of a puzzle that fit together perfectly. Over time, they built a stable life, a marriage respected by all those around them, 2 children who were their greatest pride, and a house that represented the fruit of years of hard work. Daniel worked tirelessly at a technology company, climbing step by step until reaching a comfortable position that allowed her family a secure standard of living. Laura, on the other hand, had always had a freer spirit, but had settled in the marketing field where her creativity was put to good use. They seemed happy, at least. That's what everyone saw, at least. That's what Daniel believed. The house they lived in was the mirror of what they had built together, a spacious residence, furnished with Laura's good taste, with a well-kept garden, where her children played. On weekends, the routine was predictable but harmonious. In the morning, Daniel left early for work after a coffee prepared in a hurry and a quick kiss with his wife. Laura accompanied the children to school before going to the agency, where she worked. In the evening, they had dinner together when the weather allowed it, and on weekends they tried to fit into a family schedule small moments of simple happiness that made Daniel believe that despite the natural wear and tear of the years, their marriage was still solid. But sometimes in the silence of the longest nights, he realized that something had changed. Laura no longer looked at him the same way. She no longer cared about being so present. It always seemed distracted, too busy with her cell phone, with messages, with her multiplying work commitments. But she never questioned it, maybe out of fear of the answer. Laura's business dinners were recurring events. As a marketing director, she actively participated in these social gatherings where clients and executives gathered to strengthen bonds and discuss business in a relaxed atmosphere. Daniel never really liked these occasions. He found them tiring, full of flattery and hidden interests. But he always accompanied his wife, even though he preferred to stay home with the children that year. But Laura insisted that he didn't have to go. She said it would be a formal and boring event only for the office staff. He hesitated for a moment, but accepted. After all, he trusted her. Why shouldn't I trust them? Their marriage had endured so many phases, from the early years full of passion to the difficult moments when they needed to make ends meet. At the beginning of their life as a couple, they had overcome the difficulties related to raising young children, the challenges of professional life, and scheduling conflicts. He was sure that they were still partners, that Laura was by his side, as she had always been. The only thing that bothered him, it was the feeling that she was distant lately, not in obvious gestures, but in small ways. The way she avoided eye contact at certain times, the way she smiled on the phone when she thought about not looking, the way she seemed happier when she was out than when she was home. But he always dismissed these thoughts as mere paranoia. He refused to be one of those insecure husbands who investigate their wife's every move, who live in the shadows of mistrust. Their marriage was usual. He had no reason to be suspicious. But some nights were different. Some nights brought a silence to weigh a weight on his chest he couldn't explain. When Laura came in late from work, when she seemed less involved with the family, when she lay on the bed facing the opposite direction, avoiding any approach, he felt it, but ignored it. I didn't want to be that kind of man. Maybe it was just tired. Maybe she was just overwhelmed. Laura's boss was always a recurring name in his wife's conversations. She praised him as an inspiring leader, someone who could motivate the team, who understood the market like no other. Daniel never cared. He was never the jealous type. He believed that a good man, the work environment was essential, and it was natural for Laura to admire her superior. But in retrospect, she noticed his comments were starting to change slightly. First, he was just an admirable boss, then a brilliant leader, then a friend, then someone she shared professional confidences with, then someone she spent more time with than necessary. She didn't notice it at first, but now, looking back, she could see the signs. The weeks leading up to the company dinner were marked by even more unusual behavior from Laura. She seemed happier, more radiant. She bought a new dress. She spent more time in front of the old one getting ready. She said she needed to impress, that it was going to be a big night. Daniel thought it was strange, but didn't comment. After all, who was he to judge? It was his event, his career. I didn't want to seem authoritative, so he said good night and stayed home with his kids. But that night was not like the others. When Laura came home, there was something different about her. I couldn't explain it. Something in her eyes, the way she avoided talking too much about the event, something in the way she looked away. Daniel asked how it had gone, and she answered with short, hasty answers, without details. There was tension in the air, a silence that wasn't comfortable, a silence that hid something. He fell asleep with a discomfort in his chest, an uneasiness that he couldn't define. Something inside him told him that something was wrong, something inside him was starting to scream even if he didn't want to hear it, but he didn't know it, yet I wasn't sure, yet I still had no idea that that night would change everything. The days after the company dinner, they brought a strange feeling to Daniel, something invisible, but present like a shadow, that crawled around the corners of the house, something that couldn't be named, but was there pulsating in the air. Laura seemed normal. She acted. As always, she smiled when necessary. She kept her routine unchanged, but there was something in the way she moved. The way she looked away at the right time, the way she avoided long conversations. Daniel tried to ignore it. He tried to convince himself that everything was okay, that it was just paranoia. But then came the first night when he turned off his cell phone before going to bed. He didn't ask anything. He just looked. Maybe it was a new habit. Maybe I was tired of the incessant notifications. But then it happened again, and again the little details started piling up. He started leaving early for work, citing meetings, last-minute events, and emergencies. I arrived even later, justifying team dinners, tight schedules. That difficult. The weekends got busier. There was always an urgent commitment, a last-minute request. Daniel started to notice that the moments alone between them were becoming rarer. Her touch was more distant. Her kisses were quicker. Her hugs were shorter. The desire seemed to have evaporated. And when he tried to get closer, he felt the invisible barrier Laura had erected between them. The children didn't understand anything. For them, everything continued as normal. The mother was still there, the father, even the routine was taking its course. But Daniel saw what no one else saw, and it began to consume his thoughts in a way he never imagined. One night when Laura said she was going to work late, Daniel lay awake, waiting. The clock was turning slowly. Every minute it was a weight on his chest. When it almost got to midnight, he smelled something different. It wasn't perfume, it wasn't alcohol. It was something indefinable, something that stuck to her skin like an unwanted memory. He watched her in silence as she changed, as she walked into the bathroom, as she avoided looking him in the eyes. He didn't ask for anything, not that night. The next morning before she woke up, he took her phone. Her heart was pounding, her hands were sweating, because she had never done anything like this before. But I needed to know. She needed to put an end to that doubt that was eating at her. She entered the wrong password. I tried again, one more time, wrong, and then she understood. Laura had changed the password for the first time in years. She felt her blood run cold. What else was Naz hiding from that moment on? Daniel started paying attention to everything. The moments she left the room to answer calls, in the smiles she gave her phone, and the messages she quickly deleted. He started noticing the times, the patterns, the excuses. Every detail that before seemed insignificant now became a piece of the puzzle. That's when he decided to try it. He thought he was going on a business trip, something last minute, just a night out. Laura seemed surprised, but didn't ask questions. The night she was supposed to be out of town, she stayed in a nearby hotel. Without turning off his cell phone, waiting at 10 p.m., he sent a random message asking if everything was okay. Laura took a while to respond. After a few minutes, she said she was tired and would go to bed early. But Daniel knew it was a lie. He came home in the early hours of the morning. His heart was pounding in his chest. The air was heavy as he walked through the door. The house was dark, silent. He slowly climbed the stairs, breathing heavily. When he entered the room, he saw that the bed was empty. The sheet was still intact on his side. The restlessness inside him grew. He walked through the house, walked down the hall, went to his office. And then he found it. His cell phone, forgotten on the table, was still unlocked. His heart was pounding. With shaking hands, he took the device and opened the messages. And then the truth revealed itself to him. There it was, every word, every sentence, every detail. He didn't want to see his name, his boss's name, the conversations, the meetings, the plans. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an unfounded suspicion. It was real. His scanning eyes were scanning the messages, like looking for something that could erase it, something that would make it clear that it had all been a mistake. But there was nothing, just cold and irrefutable proof. This world spinning. His legs became weak, his chest tight. For a moment, he thought he wouldn't be able to respond. Laura had betrayed him, and nothing would ever be the same again. The house was immersed in a thick and suffocating silence. Daniel felt the heavy air around him, as if the environment itself knew the truth that it now carried within itself. Laura's cell phone was still there, inert on the table. But to him it seemed like a bomb that had already exploded, leaving splinters everywhere. His fingers were gripping the device so tightly that his knuckles were white. He knew he needed to calm down, but how could he maintain control when everything he had built had collapsed before his eyes? He took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts, But the pain, it was oppressive. Burning like an open wound that couldn't be closed. Laura went down the stairs, calmly fixing her hair without noticing his presence. When she saw him, she stopped suddenly. Daniel's gaze was hard, different from anything she had ever seen before. For a moment she hesitated, as if her body had understood before her mind could process it. He didn't say anything right away. He simply held up the phone, leaving the screen on. Between the two of them, her face went pale, her eyes, they ran to the device. Then again, now her breathing became shaky. Finally, she spoke, her voice at a dangerous tone. "Do you want to tell me something, Laura?" Her silence was deafening. No words, no gestures, nothing that could reverse what had already been done. The seconds passed, and she seemed unable to articulate any answer. But she didn't want excuses. I didn't want empty justifications. She wanted the raw and painful truth, as it was. She swallowed with difficulty. "Daniel, can I explain to you?" She laughed a laugh without any trace of humor. "Explain to me what exactly? How you destroyed our marriage, how you've been making fun of me all this time, or how easy it was to lie to me all those nights." He took a step forward, and she instinctively stepped back. "You were with him yesterday, right?" The hesitation on her face was all she needed to answer his voice. She stood up, full of an anger she had never had before, tried before. Laura closed her eyes, as if doing so could push reality away. She whispered, almost voicelessly, but she already knew the answer. The confession fell between them like thunder. Daniel felt his stomach drop. Even knowing the truth, hearing the words come out of his mouth made everything much more real, much more unbearable. He ran his hands over his face, trying to contain the fury that was pulsing inside him. "How much time has passed?" The question came out sharp. Laura hesitated again. "Daniel, how much time has passed?" Laura, his eyes were full of tears now, but he didn't feel sorry, only contempt. "A few months," he confessed. And then the final blow from before the children's last birthday. He closed his eyes for a moment. His chest rose and fell rapidly, as if he was suffocating. His every word was a knife tearing a piece out of him. The betrayal was already unbearable in itself. But knowing that during his children's birthday, while he was smiling with his family, while he thought he was living a moment of true happiness, Laura was already engaged to another man, was a blow he didn't know if he could bear. But then the question that didn't she wanted to do, but what had to be said, "You love him?" Laura was silent. Daniel's heart was beating so hard he could hear it in his ears. He needed the answer. He needed to know if it had all been just a passing wish, or if she didn't love him anymore. "I don't know," she finally answered, and that answer was even worse than a yes. She laughed, but this time there wasn't even a hint of humor in it. "Don't you know you've destroyed our lives? Don't you know?" She shook her head. "So I'll make it easy for you. Take your things and get out of this house. Our children will know who you are." Her gaze was full of desperation. "Daniel, please, and I'm still their mother." He stared at her. Her eyes were shining with pent-up fury. A mother who destroyed her own home. The silence fell between them again, thick, sharp. But then when Laura finally seemed to accept what he was saying, when she lowered her shoulders in surrender, Daniel saw something change in her expression. A different terror took over his eyes. He frowned. "What was it?" Laura hesitated, and then muttered barely audibly, "There's something you don't know." His anger exploded again. "Nothing else? What else could you hide from me, Laura? What else?" His gaze trembled. "It's not about us. It's about him." Daniel half closed his eyes. "And your lover?" His silence irritated him even more. "Speak quickly." He took a deep breath, his face contorted in a mixture of anguish and fear. "He didn't tell me at first. I only found out after it had already happened." Daniel felt his stomach drop. "What are you talking about?" He hesitated once more before finally blurting out the truth he never expected to hear. "He's married." Daniel's world was spinning. The betrayal was already devastating, but now there was another level, even more cruel. The man Laura had thrown her marriage away for the boss she said she admired, who she described as a reliable, respected professional, was also a traitor. He also had a wife. He was destroying another family at the same time he was destroying his own. Daniel felt nausea rising in his throat. You knew it, since his voice was lower now, full of absolute contempt. Laura lowered her head. "I found out a few weeks ago. He said he would tell his wife, that he would fix everything, but I don't know if that will happen." The explosion inside Daniel was immediate. "You tell me that in addition to cheating on me, you have become the other. You have agreed to be a married man's second option." The contempt in his voice was overwhelming. Laura started to cry, but she didn't want to see. "I didn't want to hear it." He moved away, as if touching her would contaminate him. "Get out of this house now." She tried to speak, tried to get closer, But he took a step back now. Laura finally realized that there was nothing left to say, that there was nothing left to save. She quickly gathered her things, sobbing, unable to look him in the eye as she walked out the door. Daniel felt his chest burning, felt everything inside him collapse, and then, in his mind, a cruel thought appeared. His boss's wife knew. Daniel stood in the center of the room, feeling the weight of the door close behind Laura. The sound echoed in the empty house, taking with it a cruel and definitive meaning. The woman he loved, who he thought he knew, who had shared his life for years, was now just a shadow of the past. But the silence that remained brought no relief, only an oppressive emptiness. He looked around and realized that everything seemed the same, but nothing made sense anymore. The sofa where he sat was there, intact. On the dining table, there were still the dishes from the dinner the night before. The walls that had once witnessed so much laughter now seemed cold, without a soul. He ran his hands over his face, trying to contain the storm inside him. But it was impossible. But now it was mixed with something worse, a sense of betrayal that went beyond marriage. He wasn't the only one to be deceived. Even Laura's boss's wife lived in a blind and trusting lie, like he had been all this time. How would he be now? Suspicious, naive. He already suspected it possible that there were nights when she too stayed awake, feeling that there was something wrong, never unable to say what it was. The thought hammered his mind, growing like a dangerous idea. Should say it, I should destroy once and for all the farce carried out by this man. The radio said yes, that no one deserved to live in the darkness like he did, but the pain said that this meant reopening a wound that perhaps would never heal. Laura's betrayal was already unbearable. He was ready to bear the weight of being responsible for revealing the truth to someone else. He took out his cell phone and with still shaking hands began to type his boss's name on the internet. He immediately found the man's profile, his arrogant face printed in the photos of company events and conferences, in important meetings. But then, as he scrolled down the page, he found something that made his chest tighten even more. A recent photo of him with his wife and children, a simple but devastating caption, "Family is everything." Daniel felt a bitter taste in his mouth. The irony of those words was suffocating. That man had not destroyed just one family, but two, and he was still smiling, as if nothing had happened, as if your life was untouchable, as if he could continue to lie to everyone without ever facing the consequences. The dilemma in his mind intensified. If he had said it, he would have destroyed that woman the same way he had been destroyed. But if he had remained silent, he would have allowed the lie to continue, that man to continue unharmed, without paying for what he had done. He knew exactly how she would feel when she found out. The knot in her stomach, the shortness of breath, the feeling that the earth was opening up and swallowing everything. She knew the pain would not go away soon, that it would become a scar that she would carry with her forever. She wanted to be responsible for it. She grabbed a glass of whiskey and drank it all in one gulp, as if the alcohol could melt the weight of the decision. But nothing helped. Her whole body throbbed with the need to act, but at the same time with the fear of what would happen next. She imagined the scene, the moment the boss's wife read her message, the moment her world would fall apart. She could almost hear the sound of her cell phone falling from her hand, the horrible silence that would follow, the way her heart would break, just like his. She also spent nights in sleep, reliving every detail, looking for signs she had never seen before. She spent hours questioning every moment, every word her husband said, trying to figure out where the lie began and the truth ended. She held her cell phone tight, looking hesitantly at the screen. Her name was already there. She had found it right away. Her profile, it was public, and there were smiling photos, the happy moments. She had no idea, not yet. Her breathing was rapid. Her fingers were floating on the screen, ready to write. But then a memory invaded her mind. Your children, their faces appeared in her mind like a blow. They didn't know it, yet they still didn't understand. For them, the mother was just a mother, and the father was just a father. They didn't know that the world could be so cruel, that love could crumble like dust in the wind. How would she explain it to them? How would they find the words to describe what had happened without breaking something inside them forever? The truth always had a price, and sometimes the price was too high. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. His pain, it was still immense, but now there was something stronger that was growing inside him, a clarity that I didn't have before. He couldn't change the past. I couldn't go back in time and stop Laura from doing what she did, but I could choose what to do now. And then he made a decision. He opened his cell phone and began to write, but the message he would send wouldn't be the one he had thought before. He wouldn't be driven solely by anger or by the desire for revenge. He would write to let that woman know the truth. But he will also write so that she can choose what to do with this truth, because in the end he knew better than anyone that a lie kept too long only becomes more cruel if revealed too late, and that now he would know. Longer let the lie prosper. Daniel remained still for a few moments with his eyes fixed on the screen of his cell phone where the written message was waiting, just one touch to be sent. He took a deep breath. The weight of that decision was pressing on every fiber of his body. At the top of the conversation shone the name of Laura's boss's wife, a name that until a few hours before had meant absolutely nothing to him, but that now had an immense weight. He knew that the moment he pressed the send button, everything would change. The domino effect would begin, and nothing could be undone. His heart was pounding in his chest. He knew he was about to destroy another life. But at the same time, how could he allow that woman to continue living a lie? He closed his eyes for a moment. I had gone through the phase of anger, shock, devastation. Now all that was left was a kind of tiredness that he couldn't describe, a weight that couldn't be lifted, but only carried. When he opened his eyes again, he made his decision. He pressed send. The cell phone remained in his hand for a few seconds, as if he expected an immediate response. But he knew it wouldn't happen that quickly. It wouldn't be easy. He stood up, feeling the weight of the decision fall on his shoulders, and began to walk around the house that seemed cold and strange. Everything seemed out of place, as if it wasn't the house he had built anymore. He took the car key and went out. He needed to get out of there. I needed to breathe. The night was thick. The city was lit up by streetlights and headlights, but to him it all seemed dark. He drove aimlessly for a few minutes until he realized he already knew where he was going, the restaurant, the place where it all happened, where Laura and her boss began what would become the destruction of their marriage. He didn't know why he had gone there, maybe just to face reality head on, to feel like he had some control over the narrative that was crumbling. The cell phone vibrated. He took the device and looked at the screen. The answer had arrived. For a few seconds he hesitated to open it. His mind was teeming with possibilities. How would he react? You will doubt it. I would go crazy. Or maybe you already knew. He pressed the screen and read the message. It's a cruel joke. He closed his eyes. Obviously, it was natural that the first reaction was disbelief. He replied with his mind racing. He was not joking about something like that. I didn't believe it either at first, but I have the proof. He waited. The seconds seemed like an eternity. Then the answer arrived. I prove it. He sighed. Obviously, he needed to see for himself. Then, without hesitation, he started to attach the screenshots of the messages he had found on Laura's cell phone. Every word, every sentence he read, and that destroyed it, now would be sent to someone else to do the same damage to him that had been done to him. He pressed who send. He waited. The minutes passed. He could imagine the scene on the other end, the phone in his hand, his eyes examining every detail, his breathing becoming irregular, his heart beating fast. He imagined the shockwave going through her body the same way it had gone through his. He knew exactly what she was feeling in that moment. The answer took longer, but it came. Oh God. Daniel rested his head on the steering wheel. I'm sorry, Digit, not knowing what else he could have said. The answer this time came quickly. Are you sure you're my husband? He closed his eyes. How could he deny it now? But deep down I understood. The desperation drove her to look for an alternative, the possibility that it was all a mistake. Yes, Digit, if you need more proof, I can give you the next message. It took longer, and when it arrived it was short. Meet me. He took a deep breath. When now? Daniel hesitated for a second, but then, Digit, tell me where. He sent the address of a nearby bar. He knew that from now on everything would change. Even more, he drove to the place in silence, feeling the weight of the moment on his shoulders. When he arrived, he saw a woman sitting at a table in the corner staring at her cell phone with red eyes. He slowly approached, and when she looked up, he said she realized there was no need for words. She already knew. They sat in silence for a moment, then she spoke with a shaking voice. How did you find out? Daniel sighed, running his hands over his face. I didn't want to find out, but she was inattentive. Small details, different behavior. I tried to notice things. And then one night I took her cell phone. It was all there. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. I feel so stupid. Daniel shook his head. We are not stupid. We trust the people we love. This doesn't make us stupid. It makes us human. She laughed. But it was a laugh without joy. I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined he was always like this, so sure of himself, so devoted to his family. I wonder how long he's been looking into my eyes and lying." Without hesitation, Daniel understood every word. It was a reflection of what he felt. "What are you going to do?" he asked, looking at him. He remained silent for a moment. "I don't know yet," she answered. I nodded too. The two of them stood there for a while, feeling the weight of the moment, sharing a pain that no one else could understand. Then she took a deep breath and looked at him. "But I won't leave go this thing." Daniel knew she was right, and for the first time he felt like he wasn't alone between them. The silence stretched across the cafe. The woman in front of Daniel still clutched her phone, her red, tearful eyes staring at the screen, as if trying to find a way to deny what was already undeniable. The air around them seemed thick, filled with something that couldn't be described in words. He knew the pain wouldn't go away quickly. He knew each of the next few seconds would be a crushing weight on his shoulders, like it was for him. His world had just fallen apart, just like his had fallen apart before. But there was something different. There's something that hadn't been there, a determination emerging behind that hurt look. He saw it because he recognized it, the same silent fury, the same desire for justice. He took a deep breath. His lips trembled slightly, but when he spoke, his voice was firm. "I won't let things stay like this." Daniel just nodded. There was nothing he could say to ease what awaited him. His marriage to like his had already been destroyed, but the broken one still remained. And now the only question was what they would do with it. The meeting ended shortly after. No long goodbyes, no promises. It wasn't necessary. They both knew this wasn't the end, but the beginning of something much bigger. Daniel left the cafe feeling a bitter relief, a satisfaction that wasn't complete, but at least gave him the certainty that he wasn't the only one to suffer the consequences of that betrayal. In the days that followed, the pieces began to fall. Laura's boss's wife wasted no time. She did exactly what Daniel had done. She gathered evidence, consulted a lawyer, and prepared for a fight she imagined would be brutal. And then came the explosion. The story spread like wildfire in Laura's office. The rumors spread quickly. People whispered in the hallways, and hour by hour her boss confronted his wife inside the company, and the scene was worthy of scandal. Screaming accusations, the truth exposed in front of everyone. He tried to deny it, he tried to downplay it, but the messages, the evidence was all. There was no escape. The fall was quick and painful. She lost her trust of his superior's team. He tried to keep his, but soon he found himself with his back to the wall. The atmosphere became unbearable. The stares, the whispers. His once impeccable reputation was now destroyed. And then came the final blow. His wife asked for a divorce and reported everything. In the social circles in which they moved, not only lost his marriage, but also his credibility, his prestige. Soon the company began to feel the weight of the negative exposure, and the pressure was too great. He was removed and then fired. Laura, for her part, she did not come out unscathed. When everything came to light for her too, the consequences were devastating. The respect she had within the company was destroyed, and working there became impossible. The silent hostility of her colleagues, the stares that before he ignored now became unbearable. He tried to resist, but he knew it was over. He resigned without many options. But the worst thing was not losing his job. He was losing everything that really mattered. When he tried to see his children, he met resistance. Daniel did not forbid it, but he didn't make it easy. He didn't make a fuss. He didn't shout. He didn't forbid visits. But the children, on their own initiative, began to move away. They didn't understand everything right away, but they felt the difference. They felt the tension, the looks, the changes in their father's behavior, and little by little, without the need for direct interference, they began to reject him. The hugs were no longer the same. The visits were shorter and shorter. Daniel's silent contempt was reflected in them without him needing to say a single word. Laura tried to rebuild her life. She tried to justify her choices to herself. She tried to believe she wasn't a bad person, that she had simply made a mistake, but the reality was cruel. Nothing seemed to be going well anymore. The man she had thrown everything away for was now just ruined, incapable of helping her in any way. Not only did he destroy her marriage, but he also destroyed the only other person who could have been her escape route. And Daniele didn't come out of it unscathed, but he came out with his head held high. It took time, but he rebuilt himself. The divorce happened quickly, without more arguments than necessary. She sold the house. She started over from boss in a new place, far from the memories that weighed too much. And then when he least expected it, he met someone. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't planned, but it happened. Someone who didn't carry the weight of the lie, someone who didn't consider it a mistake to be corrected. And for the first time in a long time, he felt light, not because I had forgotten everything that had happened, but because I had finally left it behind. Now looking back, Daniel knew that the pain would never go away completely. Some scars remained, but he also knew that he had overcome it, that he had moved on, that his life was not defined by the betrayal, but by what he had done after. And Laura, she remained behind a shadow of a past that no longer had power over him, and so the truth became straighter. And in the end, the only thing left were the consequences. If you got this far, I want to know your opinion on this story. What would you do in Daniel's place? How would you deal with a betrayal like that? Leave your comment and tell me what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this here. We don't support any kind of betrayal. See you in the next story.